Hello YouTube, and welcome to another update video about my progress towards getting rid of fossil fuels from my life. What is there to talk about? Right, first let's start with the smaller, simpler things. So, motorcycle. I've put it up for sale. I've had a few inquiries, but it's not been sold as yet, so that's still ongoing. But it is in the process of being sold. Second thing, car. I mentioned in the previous video that we had ordered a MG ZS EV, which was due to be delivered in April. Unfortunately, we got a call just before April to say that it had been delayed, and it was now looking at being sometime around sort of September, October time. This was a bit too long for us to wait, really, so we decided to cancel that lease, and we're now looking instead at potentially buying a full EV to replace the Outlander PHEV. We've taken a Tesla for a test drive, we've taken a Ioniq 5 for a test drive, and we're hoping to take an EV6 for a test drive soon, and we'll look at what we want to do about that once we've driven them all and try and make the best decision about which one to go for after that. As far as the cooker goes, I've been keeping an eye out for some sort of reconditioned range cookers. I did have a conversation with a company that reconditions them to see if they'd be interested in taking our current dual fuel range cooker as a sort of a trade-in towards another one as well. Those discussions are ongoing, so hopefully it won't be long before we can replace that. What else was there? Yes, and then the main thing, of course, is the central heating. So I have made some inquiries with a few local companies about getting a quote for a heat pump, and I'm just waiting on times and dates for them to come out and have a look, and so that we can get those quotes underway. I will obviously do an update video once I have all the information, but the main reason for this video was to present some of the data that I've been collecting since the beginning of January. So if you watch my previous video, you'll see that I was collecting temperature data both inside and outside the house from the beginning of the year. I was running my gas central heating system in January in the way I have typically always done it, which is with a very high there's a high temperature from the boiler, but it's only on twice a day, so in the morning and in the evening. And then for February, I tried turning the flow temperature right down to 45 degrees to simulate a heat pump, and left that on 24/7 for all of February. And then in March, I basically substituted the main large gas-fired radiator in our house with substituted it for an electric one, smart radiator, to see what kind of power usage that had, and whether or not it was capable of keeping that area warm using the biggest sort of smart electric radiator I could find. I've been collecting data all that time about the inside and outside temperature, and so I thought I would present some of that information today and see what we can learn from that. So let's have a look at what I found out. So we'll start off looking at just some graph of what a typical day looked like when I was running my central heating system, as I always have, i.e. twice a day with a high flow temperature. Unfortunately, if you've watched some of my previous videos, you'll know I had a Raspberry Pi SD card malfunction, and I lost quite a lot of data, and that included all the data that I'd temperature data I'd collected for pretty much January. So the only day I have left is this one, the 7th of January, and that's because I'd taken a picture of it for the previous video I did. But it demonstrates what a typical day would have looked like the way I used to run my central heating system. So you can see that the outside temperature is sort of 5 degrees or lower, and the inside temperature would have been losing heat through the early hours of the morning, and then the heating system would come on to try and warm the house up before we got up, but it would only warm it up a little bit, and then it would go off and we'd go off to work, and the house would continue to cool down and down and down and down, and then eventually the heating would come back on at probably about 4 or 5 o'clock and start to heat the house up again, and the temperature would rise up until eventually the heating would switch off at about 11 o'clock or something, and then the house would start to cool down again, and that would be the typical profile that you'd see for all the days in January. And in January, for the whole month of January, my gas bill was well, not my gas bill, the amount of kilowatt hours of gas we used in January was 2,584. So about 2,500 kilowatt hours of gas working in that way. And then for February, I turned the flow temperature down to 45 degrees and put the heating system on 24/7. Now I have a bit of a problem with the largest radiator in my house, in that it seems to have either a slight blockage or something else is going on, because all the other radiators in the house would get warm, but that one would hardly get warm at all. And as it's the one that needs to contribute the most heat, that was a bit of a problem. So I had to compensate from that by turning the flow temperature up a little bit more. So what I did was I turned up the flow temperature to about 50 degrees, which is still sort of around what heat pumps can produce, but that helped to make that radiator actually produce some kind of heat and contribute. So let's have a look at a typical day near the for the month of in February. So you can see here the outside temperature was much higher on the 28th of February, but with the heating on 24/7, with that low flow temperature, you see we had it set to 20 degrees, and the temperature pretty much stays at 20 degrees no matter what's going on outside. And you can see the next day, same thing again. So in all these cases, the temperature remained fairly constant. There are a few places where it dips, and this is because the pump on my central heating system is on its way out. It's not worth replacing at the moment, because obviously we might be replacing the whole system.
But sometimes when the heating goes off and then it tries to come back on again, the pump won't spin, it'll get stuck, and I have to manually go and tweak it so that it starts spinning again. It doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally it does, and we don't notice straight away, and so the temperature starts to drop more than it would normally, like it has done here, and then us noticing it, I go and get it started again, and then it works fine again. So there's a bit of variation because of that, but on the whole, it wasn't really too impactful. So yeah, you can see the temperature holds at about 21 degrees, which is just, you know, a nice comfortable temperature. Even when the outside temperature drops all the way down to sort of 4 degrees here, it still stays around 20 degrees. And so running it that way for the whole of February, what we found was that the amount of gas we used in February was 2,400 kilowatt hours, so about the same, in fact slightly less than January, but the weather wasn't quite as cold, so maybe that accounts for the 100 difference or so. But basically it seems to be just to use the same amount of gas to run your system at a much lower temperature but on permanently, as it does to run it at a high temperature and have it on twice a day. And it's certainly more comfortable temperature in the house, because the house stays a steady 20-21 degrees all the time, whereas when you look back at the one from January, you know, it was 20 degrees for a bit, but then it drops right down to sort of 18, 17, and then it takes quite a long while to get back up to temperature again, and it's not that comfortable while you're waiting for it. So I definitely would recommend turning the temperature down on your boiler and just have it on all the time. It won't, you know, it shouldn't cost you any more in terms of money, but it's certainly a lot more comfortable. Okay, and then what I did for March was I replaced the radiator with initially I used this Cryos radiator by Rointe, and I did some tests on that to see whether it would lower the amount of power it used when it was just trying to keep a steady temperature, you know, or whether it would be just constantly switching on for a while at its maximum value and then switching off for a while and then on for a while and then off for a while as the thermostat, you know, switched it on and off, because that wasn't going to work very well with my home storage battery. And unfortunately the Cryos smart radiator did do that, so I sent that one back and I ordered a different one instead, which from watching a video on YouTube about it, I believed that one would work in the way that I was hoping, in that it would lower the power down to just keep the stable temperature rather than keep turning on and off rapidly. And unfortunately this one doesn't work that way either. This was the Ascot range by Premspec, and it also just switched on and off in the same way. So I decided to keep that one and just use it anyway and see what kind of effect it would have. And so from the 8th of March, which is this day, I switched that electric radiator on permanently to replace the large radiator I mentioned just a while before, the one that was not getting much in the way of heat, to see whether or not the electric radiator could heat that area that large radiator normally heats, and how much electricity it used to do that. And so yeah, from basically from the 8th, that radiator was doing the job of one of the gas radiators, and the gas radiator was switched off. think I only switched it on in the electric radiator from the afternoon, so that was the first. So if we look here, this is the power draw from the electric radiator, and yeah, it was only really switched on from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But you can see each of these little spikes. This is just it switching on and then off and on and off and on and off and on and off. So it's doing that all the time. And on the first day, it was only on for half the day, but it used 3 kilowatt hours. So it was only really on for this sort of latter half of the day here, and you can see that the temperature is actually nice and stable while that one was in use. The 9th was basically the first full day of it being used, and again the temperature stays roughly around 21 degrees all day long. And if we look at the power usage, so it was 11 and a half or so kilowatt hours that day of electricity it used. But you can see again it's constantly on, off, on, off, on, off, on, all the time until about 10 o'clock, and then the house was probably warm enough that it doesn't switch on, and then as the evening comes in and the outside temperature starts dropping, it came on again. So yeah, during the middle of the day, see, that warmer period meant that it didn't really need to be on. The house was holding the heat from the other radiators enough, and then in the evening, yeah, it came on again. So you can see, yeah, 10th, 11th, I mean, it's all pretty stable. So what we can say from this is that the electric radiator had, no problem providing the same amount of heat output as the normal radiator did. And you can see, yeah, it's turning on and off as and when it needs to. So this is the day before I put the electric radiator in, and the 8th is the first day when it ran, and it was in the evening. But you can see what a mess it makes of the graph. This is it constantly turning on, off, on, off, on, off, and you can see all these drops below zero. This is when we're pulling from the grid, and even though it's only for a few seconds, you can see that we're pulling a lot from the grid, lots of small amounts from the grid all the time. And then we're also all these orange peaks above the line is where we're exporting to the grid. So because of the battery system struggling to react quickly enough to the constant on-off nature of these of this battery, you end up leaking away some of your battery energy to the grid, and you also end up importing some energy from the grid. And again, see, if we look at the 9th, so this is where it's the heater was on through the night, and you can see it's just a constant jaggy all the way along here of it switching on, off, all through the night, and all through the day, and it just makes it's not really an ideal solution if you've got battery storage system. Now what I did try and do is I tried to run it off of my off-grid inverter. So this supplies power directly from batteries in my power shed, and it's not grid tied, so it can't pull any energy from the grid. So when the radiator switches on and requests power, the inverter will pull power from the batteries to supply it directly. And as soon as the radiator turns off again, the inverter will just stop pulling energy from the batteries. There's no delay like you get with a grid-tied inverter. So what that means is I don't get all the little spiky things on the graph. And we can see, so this is on the 20th. So you can see here on the 20th you've got all the jaggy as normal below the line, which is where it's running off the grid-tied battery inverter. But from about nearly 10 o'clock in the evening, I switched it over and plugged it into the off-grid inverter, and you can see that there's no jaggies below the line now, and that's because you don't get this effect of this delayed response with using the off-grid inverter. So running them off a huge battery bank with an off-grid inverter would be an option if you don't want to sort of leak energy to and from the grid all the time. But it's not really practical, because the amount of energy they would consume in a day would be, you'd have to have the most enormous battery bank to cover that, and it's just it's just not going to make sense to do that. So, but I did try it out just to see whether or not it would work, and certainly it does tidy up the graphs quite a bit. So here on the 25th I had it connected to the off-grid inverter all day, and you can see it's switching on and off again here, all this light blue, but no, it's not really pulling anything from the grid underneath here, so it definitely works better that way, but it wouldn't be a practical solution for a house full of radiators. And the total amount of gas that we used in March was 1,550 kilowatt hours. So the electric rad obviously did have an impact on the amount of gas we used, but obviously it was starting to get a bit warmer in March anyway, so we would have been burning less gas anyway.
Okay, well, that's it for this video. I hope that was of interest to you. So what conclusions can we get from these results? Well, we can see that it doesn't cost any more to run your gas central heating at a lower flow temperature and leave it on all the time than it does to have it at a higher temperature and have it on just twice a day. And in fact, based on the evidence that I've collected, the house maintains a stable temperature the whole time with the lower flow temperature and being on all the time, so it's actually preferable and doesn't cost you any more. So for anyone who currently has gas central heating and they're not ready to move to a heat pump or something, or an electric system just yet, when the winter comes, you'll probably find it's better to turn your gas temperature down to say 50-55 degrees and leave it on all the time, rather than having it say 75 degrees and having it on twice a day. The other conclusion I can draw is that the house can obviously be kept warm at a flow temperature of about 50 degrees, which is promising news in terms of figuring out whether or not a heat pump is going to work in my house as it stands at the moment with my existing pipework, etc. Although there is a problem, as I mentioned, with my the largest of my radiators. I think maybe it needs a power flush or something, so there's probably a bit of debris in the pipes that means that the water flow into that one's not so great. But presuming that could be sorted out, then I think there's no reason to think that a heat pump couldn't work in my house. The electric smart radiators do not work particularly well with home battery systems because they tend to spike on and off fairly quickly, and it takes a little while for the battery system to react, so you end up wasting some battery energy and also importing some energy from the grid. If you want to know why that happens, check out one of my previous videos where I explain why that happens. I'll leave a link in the description to that one. But yeah, so those sort of radiators don't work particularly well with a home battery system, so that's something for me to bear in mind. I can't really gauge any full idea of how much electricity I'm going to use to replace the gas if I go for a heat pump as yet. It will be interesting to see what calculations the companies come up with who are going to give me a quote, for a heat pump install, and then I will compare that with some of the data that I've got here in terms of the amount of kilowatt hours of gas I used to keep the house warm, and see if we can draw some conclusions about it then, and I'll present that in the next video. Hopefully that will be of use to people. But yes, so progress is being made. I will continue on, and the next video will be along probably at least a month from now. I should have had 2 quotes for heat pumps by then, and hopefully we'll have made some decisions on cars and the cooker and things like that as well. So yeah, stay tuned, and please like, comment, share, subscribe. Maybe share these videos with someone else who's thinking of getting a heat pump. It could be useful for them, and yeah, I will see you all on the next video. Cheers.